Welcome to Launch Today, the podcast focused on what it takes to get your business to $1 million or more in revenue. From marketing tactics to incredible guest interviews, we focus on sharing behind-the-scenes insights from masters in their field. If you want to grow the revenue for your startup or your business, you don't want to miss today, because today's guest is a visionary in customer transformation and AI strategy, having guided over 500 companies in generating $26 billion, that's with a B, in growth. Chris Hood is an AI, realist, and customer strategist with over 36 years of experience. Recognized as one of the top 30 global customer experience gurus, he's a best-selling author of Customer Transformation and Infallible, and his expertise spans leading digital strategies at Google and pioneering storytelling technologies at Fox Broadcasting. Chris, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I like to ask every guest in the start, why do you do what you do?
I was asked this yesterday, and I think one of the things that I said was I enjoy having conversations with people. I enjoy talking about things like technology and business, but I also enjoy presenting different perspectives. And I think that's something that we tend to lose out on, especially in today's hyper social media age where everything seems to be a conflict. And a lot of people don't want to consider other perspectives. But I think in business and technology, it's even more critical to have a short step back, look at the bigger picture, and really think about things differently. And it could be something as simple as, how do you engage with your customers? One of the most common questions that I ask organizations is, do you feel as if you are customer focused? And pretty much all of them will say yes. But then when you dive into it and you start asking complex and different types of questions about how they consider what they're doing to be customer focused, you actually start to realize that they're not. And you can't accomplish that if you are staying within your mindset and aren't willing to open up and look at things a little differently. So a lot of what I do is just having conversations and trying to shift people's mindsets on how we think about things.
You have looked at customer experience, customer strategy from a number of different lenses, right? At Google, that's just about the biggest institution you can work with. And of course, you've launched your own startups too, which brings a very much more intimate perspective. Can you share the commonalities between solving this problem for an institution like Google or a McKinsey or somebody big and doing it as 0 to 1? This is your beginning.
Yeah. So I tend to take the easy road out here and say it doesn't really matter, right? And you can look at this from a business to business perspective. You can look at it from a business to consumer perspective. You can even look at this if you're a nonprofit who traditionally doesn't think about having customers. Ultimately, you are trying to engage and serve something. Fill in the blank what that something is. And in order to achieve that, you are going to have to determine what value means to those individuals. You need to figure out what is the problem you are solving for those individuals. And you have to figure out what type of story and what type of lens you are going to present this information through. That does not change. It does not matter the size of the business. It doesn't matter the stage of the business. It doesn't matter the type of the business. Those factors will always stay the same. You have a problem that you have to solve. You have a base that you have to appeal to, and you have to show up presenting value that solves whatever the problem is. If you can do those things, then that's the starting point. Now, on top of that, when we start to talk about industry and market size and reach and personas of different customers, nonprofits have the additional layer of things like fundraising and volunteers that are coming in to support. That creates other variations of how you're going to approach it. But at the end of the day, you still have to have a strong story and a strong value proposition and solve a problem. And I think if you consider it from that perspective, like just figure out what those three things are, and you do any type of research, you can go and see how Google is handling that today. You can go and see how a nonprofit is handling that today. You could go and talk to a startup and see how they're handling that today. And you're going to see how people interact with that differently. But then you can also start to see where those are actually similar.
You're a keynote speaker, and indeed, listening to you as you're on the podcast, you've got all the signs of someone who has trained themselves in public speaks. You don't do vocal pauses. You don't repeat a word frequently while your brain is spinning up to make something happen. That's frequently touted as a superpower for CEOs, the ability to communicate professionally. Your skills as a keynote speaker and as a public speaker, how have they influenced, as a founder, how you're building and what you're doing as you build and grow companies?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question, and one that probably we could spend an entire episode on. I think there's a couple of areas that organizations and definitely executives have to consider. The first thing that comes to mind is transparency. Now, this is a term that I think is thrown out often for startups. Like, we want to be the most transparent organization on the planet. But in reality, they don't, right? I think there's a misinterpretation of what the word even means. Are we talking about transparency within my team and the culture that I'm trying to build? Are we talking about transparency with my customers? And don't talk about transparency when you're talking with your attorneys, right? They don't want you to be transparent. And yet, having the ability to be transparent in how you communicate is a huge part of unraveling what your vision is for the organization, what you want to accomplish, without trying to alienate people along the way. I don't want to cover that right now. We'll eventually get to that. Just trust me. I can't trust you if I have no idea what you're actually talking about. And transparency and how you communicate and the thoughtfulness, think about empathy towards consumers, all of that is going to come out as you start to reflect on how you want to communicate. So when you are talking with a large audience, whether it's on a podcast or whether it's in front of 1,000 people, there's a lot of people out there that will memorize what they're going to say. I will tell you right now, when you memorize what you're going to say, it doesn't come across as being authentic. And authenticity is also a part of how you want to come across and how you will grow your organization. Authenticity, transparency, empathy, emotional intelligence, these are things that cannot come across as scripted. And if you can master those, then you are going to have a better time building the culture and the vision and the strategy for your organization to be successful.
Something else I think that public speaking teaches you is just around the core of communication, right? Open a loop. And frequently, when I open a loop, if it's an extemporaneous speech, I don't actually know how I'm going to close it yet, right? I toss something out there. I'm like, there's 3 ways to solve this problem. And when I say that, I don't know what any of the 3 is, but I have faith that my brain will provide me each of them as it comes time to discuss them. But it also forces you to learn structure in how you communicate, which is crucial, because when you provide that structure in how you communicate, written word, spoken word, any of these different ways, it becomes more digestible, which is crucial for team members, investors, customers, whomever, to understand why you're doing what you're doing. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on some of this because I totally agree. I will often get asked a question like, should I do podcasting? And I say, yes, because 1, it's going to help you learn how to think and communicate on the spot. And 2, if you've ever been in an interview process, let's just say that you are currently in a job search mode and you have to go for multiple interviews. This helps drastically for having people ask you questions, and then you have to think about what your answer is and then structure that, that response and then be able to communicate that back in some compelling way. If you're in the interview process, go practice on podcasting. It's brilliant. And the other thing that you said happens to me all the time. I'll sit on these podcasts, I'll have people asking me questions, and I'll be like, I'll say something that is completely unintentional because I'm making it up as I go. And I'll say something, I'll be like, holy crap, that's really good. I'm going to write that down. That's a blog post for later. Thank you for unraveling that for me. Yeah, I just hope my brain continues to work in that fashion.
It is, I'm a very small percent of the population is what's called aphantasmic. You can't make pictures happen in their head. And then about half of them don't have an internal monologue either. So inside my head, it's always very quiet. And so when I'm planning out what I'm going to say, there's literally I don't know what's going to happen until it comes out, which is alarming sometimes for my wife when she's, what are you thinking about, Trevor? And the answer is legitimately nothing. So let me ask you, you're an AI realist. And I like that term because that is different than an AI futurist. Explain to our listeners how you perceive the difference between those two.
Hey, I would actually argue that I think as an AI realist, I can have a stronger perspective on the future of AI because I'm not going to just make up things. I posted something really funny today. The announcement came out that OpenAI
the Star Trek badge, right?
Yeah, and I posted the Star Trek emblem and obviously tongue-in-cheek suggesting, look, it comes with all of these features that most of our devices already have all of those features in it, but it doesn't have the teleportation. Beam me up is not part of the model yet. And so we start with that kind of framework as to what do we already have today and what are we then hyping for tomorrow? And think about it as an AI device, a wearable AI device. I've actually talked about this multiple times in the past. 3 or 4 years ago, I was on a podcast. I remember talking about the future of dating, the future of interactive dating. Now, imagine if you had a wearable device that was actually we'll call it your wingman, and you walk into a bar and it's like through some sort of connection, seeking out other people with the same devices, doing a personality match, and then saying, hey, go meet at the corner because I've made a match for you. And you've got this agent that's hyperactively looking for matches against other devices that are in the same room. That's a valid use case. The technology for that already exists. Like, we could already build that. But I think as we start to look towards the future, there's a lot of sci-fi. I talk about this in my book, that when we get our foundation for the capabilities of AI from the Terminator, then we have a disconnection of what reality is. And I think the media, big tech, venture capitalist, all of the movies throughout history that talk about AI, that's our foundation for what we think the future will look like. And so you go back to this AI realist perspective. Really, my thought was, I look at AI as terms of what it can actually do, not what we're trying to impose it to do. And the book that I wrote was really all about the hype, this bandwagon effect that happens when everybody starts to believe that the marketing spin of what it can do, and you start to see a lot of misinformation out there. And so I needed to reset this into some sense of reality and talk about AI as its current capabilities, the history, what we know has worked, and what is reality today, then apply that for what we think AI can become in the future based on that trajectory, not based on science fiction.
Okay. So, as someone who's been in an AI since the days of Eliza, I remember back in the days, IRC chatbot, you could ping and you ask questions and it would just have a list of 50 questions it would ask you back. And people were like, whoa, it's like a human. So you've been around AI since those days. Misconceptions abound, right? And everything now is here. My pen has AI. My freaking coffee cup. I don't know, right? We're trying to just shoehorn it into everything. As the AI realist, like, calm down. What do you see is changing for an entrepreneur, somebody who's building? What do they need to think about for, here we are, what we're half of 2025 in, for the next year, right? Out to 2026. What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, there's a lot of comments that go around. AI is here to stay. It's not going anyplace. Get on board before you miss out. That's all marketing language we can call it the fear of missing out. I've got to get on board with this. It's interesting when you think about it from the perspective, when we know that the first when the first chatbot was introduced, say, almost 50 years ago, then what's changed? Like, why all of a sudden now today is it so big and people are so into it? And what we really have to look at is the accessibility, the ability for us to engage with AI is what changed. If we know that generative AI and large language models have been around for a couple of decades, then all of a sudden now you can access that. The average person can access that on their phone via a web interface, right? That's what changed. Plus the speed of technology, the speed of mobile and internet connections, the amount of data that we have available, the amount of data that we can use to train our models has drastically changed. So all of that is actually driving the adoption and the insanity that is going on because we have made it available for the average person. But when we look at like generative AI as an example, that's only one type of AI. There's 20, 30 different variations of AI. None of the other ones which are readily available through a UI interface on my mobile device. So we're all focused on the one that we have access to. But there are more powerful AI models that are out there that are doing incredible things. When we look at medical research, cure for cancer, when we think about things like swarm AI, which is out there actually leveraging multifaceted types of environments to train a lot of different information and analyze that data through analytical-based AI, like those systems are incredibly powerful and meaningful for us. Generative AI is really, I've often positioned it as it's going to be the destruction of humanity, not robots, but actually generative AI, because it is decreasing our learning capabilities. It's flattening our language. Critical thinking skills are going out the window. It's making us more lazy. Like, these are not just things I'm saying. There's research out there, and these are factual things that are impacting us. Whereas the other forms of AI that are not necessarily in the news are drastically enhancing our lives. So if we think about that in perspective and we start to look forward, yeah, if we can get a hold, if we can get a handle on the regulations and the governance around education and how we use AI, and then start to also look about how these more powerful models will help us drive humanity forward. And then we also look at, we know that internet speeds continue to increase, amount of data that is out there continues to increase, accessibility of content continues to increase. If those trajectories remain the same, then we look at things like quantum computing, which could completely obliterate how we think about artificial intelligence. Quantum computing is out there, but when that gets into the palm of your hand via a desktop computer or on your mobile device, it completely changes the entire framework of our future. And so I think what we have to look at is, what do we know from history is factually going to continue? Speed, data, power, that kind of stuff. And then let's start to look at what other forms of AI are going to be impacted by that. Then we can get a feel for where we are today and where we're heading.
You have done work and gotten involved in game design and development. And I find it interesting in the professional space, right? I was in I worked for CD Projekt Red, which makes video games for a while. How does being involved in that influence your opinions and your approaches to customer-centric businesses?
I missed the first part. I'm sorry.
Oh, my bad.
How does the...
So you've got, like, with the background, you've done some work in game design, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
Yep.
obviously, and that's as customer-centric as a business can get. But in the B2B world, as you're working with Poly API and other businesses, how do the ideas that you find in game design apply to customer-centric building in other types of industries?
Yeah, I think what the game industry does better than a lot of industries is it's the art of the story. You got storytelling, you got interactivity. You become the hero of your own story in a lot of ways. And I'm actually working on a new book right now where the premise is that how do we learn from storytelling, like movies, TV, comic books, video games, and apply that to a customer, traditional customer. We have what I'm sure a lot of people have heard before or have been involved with is customer journey mapping, which is the process by which we figure out what is the customer going through, the journey they are going through when they engage with our business. And I'm proposing that we change that to more or less customer story mapping, because a journey entails like point A to point B. It's a linear kind of progression where a story tends to have multifaceted experiences. We tend to have highs. We beat the boss and we win, so we feel good. The boss obliterated us, and so we lose. These stories play out in all of our movies, all of our games. Superman, I'm a huge Superman nerd. Superman gets killed, and all of a sudden we're like, what? And then all of a sudden Superman comes back to life, and we're like cheering, right? There's moments of reflection. This is all part of the hero's journey. It continues on with the journey process. But the hero's journey requires characters to evolve over the course of the story with highs and lows and changes to them to impact how they come out in the end of the story, right? That's the story. I look at consumers in the exact same way. We as individuals all have our own personal stories. We have highs, we have lows that impact how we engage with the brands. For example, if I'm feeling very sad, I might go grab my Ben and Jerry's ice cream, sit on the couch and watch a movie, right? There's definitely a cliche there about watching movies and eating ice cream when we're depressed. And yet we don't really think about that. We're thinking about a typical journey for a consumer during a business process. So I think a lot of companies can really benefit when they start to not think about this purely from a linear perspective, but think about it as a multi-dimensional type of activity that we as consumers all go through on our daily lives, and how that will directly then impact or engage with your brand so that you can then grow your brand in that process.
I think almost everybody thinks of the customer journey as a linear thing. Everybody has the sales funnel, right? They teach it at Harvard, they teach it at Y Combinator. And the analogy is pretty crap, because a whole lot of people, particularly in the beginning of the journey, are surfing around the first couple layers back and forth. And then eventually you cross an interest point. And then they might dive in and say, now I'm ready to begin to make my decision. And so thinking about, when I teach marketing for folks, I say customer experience onboarding starts with the first ad, the first mention they hear of you in PR. Like the first time they hear about you is when you set expectations. And so everything else has to come back to that. So I think that's a great way to look about it.
I will take that one more step.
Yeah.
So if we stick with the concepts of a story, and we'll use Star Wars because Star Wars is a great way to think about this. The first Star Wars movie and then the first 3 movies, we'll just call those, right? The chapter 4, 5, and 6 of Star Wars. That's our journey. That's what most businesses focus on. And even in that awareness stage, when you're talking about things are going up and down and they're trying to make decisions, I agree. But I actually now consider that the prequel. Like, there's a prequel story that is happening that no one is tracking. And if you think about it as what is happening before the journey actually starts, then also there's a sequel. There's what is happening after that journey has ended. So if you think about like the awareness stage in a typical journey as being a prequel, that may have nothing at all to do with your business whatsoever. And then the advocacy stage, what happens after advocacy? What's the sequel? How do we continue on with this story? And there are elements that you can consider about the customer persona, their personality traits, their engagement, what they're doing. And again, yet we focus on just the first 3 movies and don't think about episodes 1, 2, and 3. Maybe rightly, I don't know. I think 7, 8, and 9 were worse, but that's a whole nother debate that we can get into. But yeah, if you break this out, you're absolutely right. Everybody is staying within that linear path of those stories that you're familiar with. Once they come into our organization, that's when we start tracking, and we just care about everything that has to do with us. We're not considering at all the customer and what matters to them on the outskirts before and after.
So I think this dovetails nicely into, at Fox Broadcasting, you were pulling kind of the threads of narrative, of technology, and of experience together. And in a different context than I think most tech startups think about, right? Fox Broadcasting, big media company. I remember it was maybe a decade ago now that Seth Godin was talking about in the future, every brand will be their own media company. I think that is, like, you obviously, Chris, you are a brand. You're on podcast. You've got the setup. You do this a lot. I clearly am too. I've got the mustache. I do this a lot. What parts of what these big folks are thinking about for narrative and experience comes down to founder brand, this intimate level? And because it changes when you don't have committees involved and producers and like all the big whirling parts of this. The production bits change, but I think you've talked about the story that the brand goes through. That remains consistent. And you talked about authenticity, right? That is key to this. But how do I, as a solo founder or someone running a small company, bring some of this idea of narrative into as I create content every day? How do I think about this for what I put out there?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to this. The first part is the how, which you're asking. But I think there's another part that I'll touch on just quickly, and then we'll come back, which is how do you scale it? Because what I find a lot of times is there's organizations that start off with kind of a strong perspective. They know what they want to do, and that perspective is the perspective is the catalyst for what your story is going to be. But then when you start to scale that, when you start to grow your business, especially as a leader, you've got to be able to get that message out to everybody else to have the same intensity and to be able to scale it successfully. And you as, say, the owner or the CEO can continue that messaging, but you can't be the only one to do. And I think a lot of times you'll find CEOs that want to hold on to that and say, I'm the face of the company, I'm the CEO, I'm going to be the one that continues to drive this message, and I'm going to go to every meeting and show up, and I'm going to go to every sales call and show up, and I'm going to go on. And it's just not feasible.
No, it's not.
You can't do that. So that's one consideration that you have to make, is how are you going to expand that message, create the culture of what you want to create, hire people and train them for what that message is, and get them to become advocates to share that story outside of just the founders. That's part one, or we'll say part two. First part is, how do you do that? So I said, I think most people start with, they have an idea, they want to build a business around it, and they're passionate about that. That's the starting point. Why are you passionate about this? Why do you think that this is a good idea? Now, there are a lot of people out there that have a lot of ideas, and none of them are good ideas. That's fact. I'm sorry, but that's fact.
There's our pull quote. Your ideas suck,
Yeah.
Chris Hood.
Yeah. But let's just go with this. Why are they potentially bad ideas? You didn't do your market research. You aren't really sure what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Right now, this is a huge problem. I think there's so many businesses out there and entrepreneurs that say, I want to create an AI company. Not, I see this problem and I know customers are having this particular type of problem. How could we potentially solve that problem? And maybe it will use AI to solve the problem.
I get you.
But if you're starting with the technology solution first, most likely you have a bad business model. I'm sorry.
I love that.
But that's how it works.
I love that.
And if you start with the customer first and you say, okay, what is this problem? What are we trying to solve? Why are we solving it? That answers the questions as to why are you doing this? What is your story? Now, if you've ever watched Shark Tank, just go back and watch some episodes of Shark Tank. The businesses that actually have reasons and justifications and are solving problems, and yes, of course, they're probably making some money, but those are the ones that are more interesting. Like, I was, whatever the case might be, like I was walking through the grocery store one day and I stubbed my toe and I realized that I should invent a shoe stubbing thing addition to shoes because I think that would solve the problem. Okay, maybe that's not a great idea, but you know what? You have a story there.
Yeah.
You have an interesting story that can then be materialized as to why you built this program, why it means something to you, and how that is going to revolutionize the world. And if you can think about it in that context, if I asked you, like, why are you building this? It's not, oh, I love using AI and I thought it would make a great no. There are a lot of great movies. If you've watched The Founder, about the founding of McDonald's,
That's such a good movie.
There's another movie, and the movie is not coming to my mind, but it was all about the invention of the windshield wiper for cars.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, man, I wish I could remember what the title of the movie is. I'm sure somebody listening will be screaming it. But it was all about the reality of that individual who has a story and followed a passion project. And when you're asking why, it was because of a genuine problem that they saw and they wanted to talk about it.
That movie, by the way, because I Googled while you were talking, Flash of Genius.
Flash of Genius. There we go. That's
There
it.
you go.
So, yeah, go watch that movie. It's a great movie. Like, I almost would argue that a better story is, what if this wasn't a business at all and you just wanted to talk about it? Would you be interested in talking about it? The answer is yes. That's your story. Go with it. Talk about it. Amp it up. Use that as the foundation then for, how can I share this story and get more people interested? How can I get them involved? Because if it's a good story, then of course that scaling part and everything else becomes easier as well.
Fun, yeah. I do love The Founder. It hasn't come up, I don't think, ever before in the podcast. But such a good movie where the first time someone said, what if we approached food as an engineering problem? And then the focus was, how do I get you a fresh burger in 30 seconds? And then it was, if you read High Output Management, which is way after McDonald's was created, it's the same idea. Find the bottleneck, find the resource constraint limiter, and remove it. And you can add lightness, you can add speed. And if you're a founder, you should watch that movie because it's so interesting to see the movie about these two gentlemen who were not cooks make the world's best restaurant.
Yeah, and you can watch Kroc throughout the, whatever your opinions, just put opinions about people aside, but the passion that he had to do this, and then ideas that would come around that were foundations for additional stories. How do we maintain consistency in a world of multiple businesses and franchises that all wanted to do things their own way? Like establishing those things to keep the consistency in the story and the brand awareness are all coming out in that movie, which if you want to get a good insight of how you should operate, go watch the movie.
It's a great movie. So in your book, Infallible, you talk about navigating uncertainty, and that is, at its root, that is the founder's job, or the C-suite's job. Your job is to call the big strategic shots when you don't know if they're going to be the right ones. In that book, what do you recommend for businesses to remain resilient in? I mean, obviously, AI is the unpredictable market now, right? Which is why, if you haven't seen the cover for Infallible, AI is in red. How do you navigate those unpredictable markets, those uncertain markets, and still somehow come out to win?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a story. I have a good friend. Her name is Kate. She is the CEO of a product called Lately. Lately is a AI social media tool, and she built her program and company about 5-6 years ago. And all of a sudden, overnight, the AI boom that we're in hit, and all of a sudden, she was balancing between revolutionary, let's ride the wave, or irrelevancy because now everybody is doing it. Right? But she has managed to continue to ride the wave and come out and stay relevant. The point of this is that disruption, and I've talked about this before, disruption can happen at any time, no matter what, unaware. We could have a marketing collapse, a market collapse. We could have some economical condition. We could have a war breakout. We could have COVID hit. Any number of things could happen which completely changes the calculations of your business. And the companies that can survive that disruption are usually the companies that are able to navigate. Agile, I think, is an overused word, but the agility and nimbleness of market change is one of the core foundations. So if you are set in a rigid motion, it becomes a lot harder for you to change in face of disruption. So if we look at the educational system, which was foundationally built on you come to class in person, COVID hit, and all of a sudden no one can go to class. And then they started thinking about how do we change this? And the amount of online training, online school systems, all materialized overnight. How do we get a bunch of computers into students' hands? Like all of those decisions should have been decisions that were made prior, but all of a sudden became necessities. So organizations that can adapt fast are going to be successful because they can adapt to whatever that disruption is. And that includes technology disruption. AI materializes. How do we adapt to it? And one of the ways that you can also adapt to it is understanding what your customers want. So if you're listening to your customers and they say, I really wish I had a way to pay for my groceries other than cash, you could say an ATM might work here, right? And now there is an expectation when I go to the grocery store or anywhere else, you're going to accept ATMs. If I go to a restaurant and they say we don't accept ATMs, then you're like, what? Like you feel like there's a problem here. So listening to your customers so that they will guide you and navigate you through change so that you're making decisions to prepare for what they are asking for is also a valid step. But you've got to be able to stay aware of this stuff. You've got to be able to break your processes. You've got to be able to make change fast. Startups have an easier time at doing this. As a startup, you can completely change anything you want as pretty quick. But as a larger organization, Google, you're moving a big boat moving straight, and it's going to take you a little longer to make adaptations. But Google has also been built on the fact that they are agile. And if they want to make it the change, they make an executive decision, and that gets flown down, and you're doing it. So how you manage that is really the critical part of that disruption.
So we've already touched, I think, on some of this, but you can probably tell from the books behind me, I love a good book. Other than the movies we've recommended, what's something that you would tell people, founders, they should read or listen to with an audiobook, whatever, that would make them a better founder? And tell me why.
Frankenstein.
Wow. Okay, never got that one before. Why?
I know. I knew you wouldn't have. Frankenstein is an interesting insight into passion and commitment and at all costs. I think really if we look at any of the, we'll call them mad scientist novels, they all basically identify a passion of theirs that they want to fulfill at all costs. And then what happens at all costs. And I think the correlations are often not recognized, especially when you consider like Frankenstein as the mad scientist, the doctor that wants to play God, and which we could argue a lot of CEOs fit that profile. They want to play God and build something. And then how does the townsfolk, how do people around them, how does the monster itself search for its own sense of humanity and understanding in the world? That's your consumer base. And so if you can, we were talking about earlier, I think this could actually be a fascinating blog where I can build some correlations between the novel and your business. But yeah, I always suggest that people go and don't read business books. Like all the business books are going to tell you how you can manage. And yeah, there's a lot of great business books out there. But think about it from Jurassic Park is another great example. How do you run a theme park?
That's true. I hadn't really thought about Jurassic Park and Frankenstein are like, we've got a lot of parallels there.
They're very similar.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Michael Crichton just put dinosaurs in the place of an undead monster.
Instead of a monster.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right. I will give an unusual recommendation, one that I haven't given ever before here. If you are a founder, you should go read Voltaire's Candide. Because of two reasons. One is, I think every founder, their job is to believe their startup into existence. You must be optimistic because 9 out of 10 don't make it, and you have to believe you are the 10th, even though the odds are very high that you are not the 10th. But that comes with the downside, and I think Candide talks a lot about the downside of this is the best of all possible worlds, even while plague ravages France. But this is the best of all possible. There's a point to be optimistic, and there's a point to not. And the other thing I like about Candide is it points out the absurdity of life and the circles of power we move in. And if you take it seriously, you're probably doing it wrong. So, never recommended Candide before either. It's a fun one, though.
Yeah. I think when we also reflect on AI, I've said, obviously, a lot of what we believe AI to be is based on our movies. But I think the other perspective of this is that we clearly have dystopian societies and utopian societies. If we look at Star Trek as being a utopian society in nature and foundation, then you say, what decisions were made along the lines that leverages technology to help us reach that point? So even if you use it as a frame of reference to think about artificial intelligence or technology and which path we're on, like I've argued right now, we're on the path of WALL-E, the Disney Pixar WALL-E, where you've got people who are basically floating around in chairs and watching advertisements and drinking sodas all day long, oblivious to what has happened. My argument is that if we are slowly flattening our language, if we are slowly degrading in our educational systems, that even at a fraction of that pace, like you could say like 0.1% deduction in critical thinking over the course of a year or 2 years, then by 10 years, by 100 years, we slowly reach a point where we don't know how we reached that point because we have lost our abilities to educate ourselves or think.
So what you're saying is we should all watch Idiocracy.
That's another close reference, right? Like, how did we get to that point?
Yeah.
And there has to be a framework of things that have happened to get us there. And right now, generative AI is moving us in that direction.
Interesting. This has been a very story-focused. We brought up a bunch of movies and unusual books. A great, unusual take on founders and what they should do. If people want to get a hold of you, Chris, where do they go find you online?
Yep, best place to find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can look up Chris Hood, AI Realist, and I'm sure I'll pop up. You can also go to my website, chrishood.com, and there you can find my social media. Feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me. My books, podcast, everything is right there. chrishood.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time today, Chris. If you are watching this
Absolutely.
and you have not already, be sure to subscribe. Every week we bring out more great content from thinkers and founders just like Chris to share and enlighten you on your founder's journey. Thanks so much, everybody. See you next week.